Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us here today at Book Blather. If you're new here, my name is Dave. This is Olive. And we talk mostly about books to help spread the joy of reading. Today we are talking about a book, and that book is Oath and Honor by Liz Cheney, a memoir and a warning. So, a lot of trepidation about this video. We haven't done a video quite like this before. And as I mentioned, as we entered 2024, we previously steered away from any controversial topics whatsoever. And as you can tell from the thumbnail of this video, this topic is an absolute powder keg. But one of the many changes that we talked about going into 2024 is that we were no longer going to avoid talking about books that dealt with controversial issues. We realize we talk about books all the time. Here on Book 2, we do deep dives into books and try to tease the messaging out of them because they have implications for real life. And so we shouldn't be avoiding talking about fiction books that actually deal with those real life situations. That's the whole point of why we talk about a lot of these books to begin with, is to have some intellectual discourse about these issues. So, relatively certain that we are going to get hate comments in response to this video. I suspect probably from both ends of the political spectrum, even though we're not actually going to be talking about politics, which is part of the point of this book and what we're talking about today. We're not actually talking about political positions or policy discussions, but I suspect we will get that anyway, and I suspect that I'm relatively certain that people will unsubscribe, and that's okay. We're not going to be afraid of that anymore. What I will say is that Olive and I have never once deleted a comment on our videos, and comments have been deleted, but never by us. And we respectful disagreement is welcome, and questions are welcome. Disagreeing comments and respectful argumentation is welcome. Aggressive hate is not. If you do feel compelled to do that, then please just unsubscribe and go find another channel. So with that said, like I said, not really sure how to even start a video like this, so I kept procrastinating because thought, well, this is a different kind of video, a lot of important things to say. I got to make sure we don't work from scripts, but I'm like, but I got to make sure I say everything right for this. And finally, just get on the camera and just talk about the book and just see what happens, or else you're never going to do it. So that's what we're doing. Some of it may be inartful. I may end up having to cut the video, which we don't usually do. May just have to cut some pieces out if we stumble inartfully, but we'll do our best. So, essentially what so as the thumbnail indicated, this book is about Trump and about events that have happened around Trump. And so basically, for those that aren't just not, some viewers that are not from the U.S. So for those that may not know much about, our system or some of our history about what's happened, just very, very quickly, in the U.S., our political system is dominated by two political parties: Democrats, who are generally liberal, and Republicans, who are generally conservative. Those are overgeneralizations. We're keeping it simple. And we have elections for president every 4 years. And in 2016, for those that don't know what has happened, in 2016, there was an election between the favored candidate. I mean, just in terms of odds, the favored candidate, Democrat Hillary Clinton, and Republican Donald Trump. And to the surprise of many people, Donald Trump won that election. I think even probably somewhat to his surprise. And so Donald Trump was elected in 2016, was a bit of a, unconventional president, and then ran for re-election in 2020 against Democrat Joe Biden. Donald Trump lost that election, and a lot of things which we'll talk about ensued after that, and Joe Biden became our president. Now we have entered the election season again, and there will be an election, and it's always in November of 2024, what is looking to be like an almost certain rematch between Donald Trump, the Republican, and Joe Biden, the Democrat. And so what this book, who Liz Cheney is Liz Cheney is a politician from Donald Trump's own party, the Republican Party. And when the election happened in 2016, immediately after the election, Donald Trump did not accept the results of the election. And there was a number of things that happened in the following 2 months, culminating in the first ever very violent assault on the U.S. Capitol, our seat of government, on January 6th. Those of us in the U.S. just refer to it as January 6th because that's the date on which it happened. And when that happened, Liz Cheney, who is, as I said, from Donald Trump's own party, stood up to Donald Trump and said that it was unacceptable, that the election was valid, and that what had happened, was unacceptable, and she stood up to him at that time. Now, Liz Cheney, we have in the U.S., our legislature has two main bodies, a Senate, which has 2 senators from each U.S. state, and then we have the House of Representatives, which is a more proportional representation, where a small state, that's much larger, the House of Representatives, and a small state will have less representatives than a large U.S. state. Will have a lot more representatives to reflect the population, to have representation based on the relative number of people there. So Liz Cheney, at the time, was the 3rd most powerful member of the House of Representatives. And she took this stance when January 6th happened. She took this stance, unfortunately, mostly alone. And she, along with a handful of other Republicans, voted along with the Democratic Party to impeach Donald Trump as a result of what happened. She then subsequently basically led hearings into a lot of the things, the lead up to that event and the event itself. Public hearings that investigated that and ended up with there were a lot of them. There were televised hearings, and there was a long, very detailed report about all the evidentiary findings at the end of it. And so Cheney, even though she was a leader within the party, she was basically ousted from her. Donald Trump put a lot of pressure on other leading Republicans to oust her from her position. She was ousted. She lost her leadership position, and then she later lost her re-election campaign to be a representative in Congress. And so she has, she essentially knew that all this was going to happen, but she did all of it anyway because she felt she needed to. And after the hearings concluded, those occurred in 2022. Then she wrote this book, which came out not that long ago. So just to give you a little, we're going to be honest with you about just our perspective, so you know where we're coming from when we talk about this book. I am a registered Republican. So I really am more of a libertarian at heart. I generally feel like, within reason, that I prefer that government stay out of, government should be small, and it should stay out of most things for the most part. It should stay out of people's personal lives and their bedrooms, and it should stay mostly out of, the markets and not have much regulation and all of that. So, but libertarians don't get elected here. And so it's a lot of different reasons, but the point is, at the end of the day, I lean conservative, I'm a registered Republican, and almost always vote Republican. That's the subject of a separate video, but that's the point. Almost always vote Republican and have for a long time. And so in the 2016, when the 2016 election was coming, I was very discouraged about that. It was an election between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. And I was pretty discouraged. I was not excited about either of those candidates. Donald Trump at the time was largely an unknown. I mean, he was a very known, famous businessman, but not a lot of experience in politics, and seemed kind of a little, act a little nutty sometimes. And so I wasn't excited about it, and I actually didn't know what to do. And I thought I was going to skip the election, actually, which is, of course, never the answer, but I probably just wasn't going to go vote that day. And literally the night before, I was having a conversation with my daughter we were driving back from her gymnastics practice, and it came up, and she asked me, well, why would people vote for Donald Trump? And so we had a conversation about it in the car ride, and I started explaining to her about, things are very different today for the average person. That it wasn't always like this in our government's history. Back when the country started, government was limited, and elected representatives went and represented their constituents in a limited capacity, and then they went home, and they ultimately went back to their jobs, and they resumed being a blacksmith or a farmer or whatever the case may be. And today it is no longer like that. Today, government has evolved into just a very, very powerful, untamable behemoth, where we have in this country just a massive, massive administrative class where people make lifelong careers out of being politicians, and are often more concerned with their own position than they are with implementing good policy. And so, people have become, they see this just massive administrative class that they feel like they can't affect, and they feel disenfranchised and powerless. And a lot of people think, this is a discussion I was having with my daughter, a lot of people think Donald Trump is, an unusual candidate, but a lot of people aren't really voting for Donald Trump. They're voting for his populist message, because people feel that he is going to bring power. He's not a typical politician, and he is going to give the power back to the people. And that is what people are voting for, the message. And so we pulled into the driveway, and my daughter got out and went inside, and I literally sat in my Jeep for like another couple of minutes just by myself. And I had basically persuaded myself having that conversation. And I was like, you know what, I'm going to go vote for that crazy effer tomorrow. And so that's what I did. And I voted for Donald Trump in 2016. We fast forward 4 years, and the 2020 election is coming around. I'm having a discussion with another Republican friend about the upcoming election. And I was starting to get a little concerned, shortly before the election. And I was saying to my friend, I said, I just don't know. Like, he's starting to, the way that he's speaking, and things that he's talking about, he's starting to sound actually like somebody that actually might not accept the results of the election and try not to voluntarily leave office. And my friend said, no, that's not going to happen. And even if it did, there's too many people around him that wouldn't let that happen. And it turns out we were both right. That did happen, but there were enough people around Donald Trump that it ultimately was not allowed to happen. And we'll talk a little bit about, now we're going to talk a little bit about that in this book. So, I think, a lot of, what has happened is, the country has become so polarized, and their sources of media and news are so polarized that a lot of people only even actually get exposed to certain things. And a lot of what Liz Cheney's book is about is, it kind of walks through like how much we actually know that I think a lot of the country actually doesn't know. So she walks through, starts in the very beginning, where some of the stuff that was starting to happen even before the election, some of the dangerous talk, like about using I think the National Guard, but the military, to seize voting machines to make sure that the election was conducted properly. To where a number of ex-secretaries of U.S. Secretaries of States had to write a letter to prevent that from happening, about the danger of using the military during elections. And then she talks about what happened. The elections are in early November, and then what happens. We have a 2 month sort of transition period here, where the existing president is still president. And on January 6th, it's really just an administrative event where the vice president, before Congress, before our legislative body, basically, just tallies up the votes. We already all know the results, but just officially counts the votes and basically declares the new president that had won the election 2 months before that. And she details the sequence of events that happened during those 2 months. When the election happened, Donald Trump denied the results of the election and started claiming the election was stolen. And this has been a real a phrase, but that's been used in this country for years now. That so many people have parroted this phrase about the election being stolen. And one of the things is that you will hear things still when you hear people question today about why they're voting for Donald Trump. A lot of people, if you ask them, do you think the election was stolen? A lot of people will still say yes, and they'll say like, well, but I've heard a lot of things, and if why don't they at least look into it? And it's because most people don't actually realize that it was looked into very, very extensively. So that's one of the things that Cheney tries to walk through in this book. Is she explains that there was a lot of time to investigate this, right? There was a 2 month period, and she explains about how everyone around Donald Trump in an official capacity had told him that there was no basis for claiming that the election was stolen. There was just nothing to support it, and we're talking about everyone. We're talking about Republicans, all Donald Trump's, all White House counsel, all right, all his appointees at the head of the Justice Department, all of the White House staffers, right, all of the Trump campaign leadership, everyone, all of them had told him repeatedly that there was no basis for claiming that the election was stolen. Now, we hear it a lot, but we keep hearing it. We've always kept hearing it from Donald Trump and from certain always private advisors of Donald Trump's. You probably may have heard some of these names: Rudy Giuliani, Sidney Powell, Professor Eastman. And these were all peaceful. None of these were the Republicans around Donald Trump at the time. These were all private advisors, right? That Donald Trump could get to agree with him on this and continue to say these same things. And so, but as I said, everybody around him, including all his own appointees and his own staff, campaign, administration, everything, all repeatedly told him that they've looked into it and there's no basis for it. Most people don't know this, but over 60 court cases dismissed challenges to election results in different states, U.S. states, one after another, dismissed for lack of any evidence to support that the election was stolen. Democratic judges, Republican judges, some of which wrote very scathing opinions about the attempts to push this lie. I know that's a trigger word to say it's a lie, but there could not possibly have been more in terms of administration, Republican administration, and the court system to look into it and establish that there is no question that the election was not stolen. It was a valid election. You have many people casting votes all around the country in elementary schools. Of course, you will always have a little irregularity here and there, but very, very extensively looked into that there was no substantive evidence to support that the election was stolen. But a lot of people actually don't know these facts, and they don't know how many courts and how many people confirmed this. And so that's one of the early things that she walks through, and she walks through the number of steps that Donald Trump took to try to prevent what is supposed to be just an administrative procedure on January 16th, declaring the new president, the amount of steps that Donald Trump took to try to stop that certification. It initially started with a number of phone calls to Republican officials in some of our states to, Our votes get, for those that are not in the U.S., our votes get reported like state by state, called Republican officials in those states to try to get them to reverse course and change their mind. And these, again, members of his own party, these are Republicans that stood their ground, refused to do it, became targets and started getting death threats because, as customary with all of these things, Donald Trump would then, spout a lot of hate about these people, and a lot of Donald Trump's followers then would take action. And they would threaten them, their families, and a lot of it was pretty scary. And these people all stood up and refused to do that. So then, Donald Trump then moved to try to take steps to have, other legislators object to these Donald Trump. They tried to create fake. I don't want. This is going to get this is going to get pretty complicated, especially for people that aren't in the U.S. But there are, what we call these electoral slates that go from the states, to that are, basically it's reporting the results of the votes, and Donald Trump, and his private assisters try to create fake Democratic fake electoral slates to be reported along with the legitimate slates, just to cause a conflict, so that as a mechanism for stopping the certification on January 6th. When this didn't work, he also tried to get representatives in Senate to object, in one of our legislative bodies to object, to try to stop the certification. And when all of these steps were failing one by one, it culminated in what was, basically our January 6th assault, which was Donald Trump gave a big speech with many, many thousands of just everyday supporters there, and then sent them to the Capitol. And so Donald Trump intended to lead them to the Capitol, but there's a lot of what we've learned since is that our Secret Service would not let him because it was a dangerous situation. So against his physical attempts to not let them prevent him from going, they prevented him from going, and they took him off and to keep him safe. But in the meantime, this very violent crowd went to the Capitol and assaulted it to try to stop. This is where all our government representatives were, where our vice president was, trying to conduct this certification that they were all required by law to do. And this violent mob was sent to the Capitol to attack them. Now, there's been a lot of talk about either people aren't aware of all the facts, or they're not aware of the, sometimes memories fade, and so you hear a lot about that. Well, it was a peaceful protest, or it was just a protest that got a little bit out of hand. And so, Liz Cheney walks us through this. And a lot of this is in the context of hearings that were conducted. There was hearings that were conducted by, mostly Democrats, but also a couple of Republicans. Liz Cheney, a Republican, pretty much led those hearings from June to December of 2022. And these hearings were virtually all Republican witnesses. These were not Democratic witnesses that were called. These were Republican witnesses from Donald Trump's own party and own staff. People, from inside the staffers inside the White House, people from the campaign, leaders of the Justice Department, his Republican appointees. These were all Republicans, all Donald Trump's own people, own staff, own appointees, that just one after another just gave all this very, very damning evidence. And I think that a lot of the country, this is one of the problems, a lot of the country, I think, doesn't even know that these hearings happened, because if you only watch certain news outlets, they wouldn't have been broadcast. And so a lot of people, I think, don't even know that they occurred, much less all the incredibly damning evidence that came out in those hearings. If you are one of those people that, you're not aware of this, you can easily find it. We will put the link below into the final report that the committee came up with. It's very, very long. There is an executive summary, also very long. So, but it is very, very detailed about everything that happened, all of the evidence cited, all of this testimony from Republican witnesses. And if you're not the type to do that, you can, you can search for this right here on YouTube, and you can watch. I watched a lot of those hearings myself at the time and saw what the witnesses said. Um, and, you can do that yourself, and you can see what some of these Republican witnesses testified about. So a lot of this is, all established with these witnesses and documentary evidence in these hearings. And so that was one of the other things that she walks through with that this was not a peaceful protest or just some protest that got out of hand. This was a premeditated, incredibly violent attack, violent mob with weapons that were knowingly and purposely sent to the Capitol to attack the Capitol as a last resort to stop the certification of the new president from happening. And so this went on for thousands of people, went on for hours, and conducted a very vicious, violent assault on our Capitol to try to get to our government representatives inside that were trying to do their jobs. They assaulted the Capitol. They breached the Capitol. There were our Capitol police that were trying to defend it, and the Metropolitan Police that came to back them up like at the last moment, just in time. And all of these police officers were engaged in extensive hand-to-hand combat, and there was thousands of people that were attacking officers. These were officers attacking officers with weapons, spraying them to blind them with dangerous spaces, with sprays in their faces, assaulting them with weapons, beating them. A lot of this testimony that came out from the officers that were defending the Capitol, so many officers injured, a few died. And there was testimony from all of them that these officers would get up half blinded, slipping in blood, seeing their fellow officers, on the ground bleeding, throwing up from all the chemicals that were being used. It was, she walks you through all that evidence and reminds us all very clearly about how, to make no mistake, that this was a premeditated, extremely, extremely violent assault on our Capitol to try to get to those representatives. And only because those officers fought so valiantly that those representatives were protected, they were shielded. The halls of Congress were eventually broken into, and these people hunted them in the hallways and were moments away from getting them. Our vice president had to be, escorted underground. And our vice president, another honorable Republican to his credit, refused to leave, even though he realized the danger, because he was determined to stay and do his job and certify the next president from another party. And so she reminds us all this about how purposeful and how horrendous this was, the first time in our history that there's ever been anything like this. She walks us, as I said, she walks us through the hearings that detail all of this evidence and that detail everything that happened leading up to the election, in those 2 months, but leading up to the certification, everything that happened during that attack, and what Donald Trump was doing all that time. Donald Trump was aware, of course, that all of this was going on, and he was just inflaming it. And he, sent things on Twitter, attacking his own vice president for not stopping the certification, so that these people that were breached our Capitol and were hunting representatives were screaming. They were also looking for our vice president, his own vice president, Mike Pence, screaming, "Hang Mike Pence, hang Mike Pence." And so, you have to keep in mind, they were these thousands of people were just moments away from getting to our representatives and Donald Trump's own vice president. And I can only imagine what would happen if they got to him. I mean, these people, they would have been seriously injured or killed, because these were thousands of people that were viciously, violently attacking police officers with weapons in order to break in to this Capitol building. So it was moments away from being just a very different scene. And so, you know, it. I think Liz Cheney thought it was important to put this book out, probably for a lot of different reasons. But one of those is, as she says here, is also as a warning, because we're now in a situation where I think so many people are unaware of all of this information. And Donald Trump is, we have, before our major election in November, we have what are called primaries, where you elect who is going to be, the Republican Party elects who will be the Republican nominee representative, and the Democratic Party, you know, elects who will be the Democratic representative, who will run for president. And Donald Trump is running away with the Republican Party. It has just started, but everybody has quickly fallen in line to support Donald Trump out of fear. And just as a reminder, you know, that, you know, as you can tell from all of this, I clearly have, as a Republican, have changed my mind about Donald Trump. And Liz Cheney, as one of the most steadfast conservative Republicans that you will, respect Republicans that you will ever meet, has changed her mind about Donald Trump. And, you know, I think it's just important. I want to talk about this book just because, you know, it's important for us to remember that it's okay to change our minds once we learn new things and get new information. You know, I think we all have a little bit of cognitive dissonance in us, and we dig in and we defend positions that we previously had. But it's okay, you know, like in 2016, I didn't know really who Donald Trump was and what he would become and what he was capable of. And it's okay to change my mind about Trump. And it's okay for all of us to change our mind about Trump. And Cheney is trying to give this warning about, we have never seen anything like this. Donald Trump has just an incredible grip on the Republican Party, where you just have a lot of representatives, not people like this Liz Cheney, but a lot of representatives are so fearful of him. Because if anybody goes against Donald Trump, he will attack them publicly. He will make sure to run somebody against them to try to make sure they can't get reelected. He will also bash them incessantly so that that his followers will make death threats, will show up at their house. Like, a lot of these representatives are actually physically fearful for themselves and, more importantly, their families. But they're also, of course, unfortunately, very fearful of their political careers, because Donald Trump has such a grip on the party and the Republican populace right now that he can ruin anybody. And so it's actually kind of demoralizing, you know, as a registered Republican, to see a lot of the Republican leaders really just prostrating themselves before Donald Trump at this point. And, you know, he will attack them and he will humiliate them, and they will turn around and endorse him and stand next to him and smile. And I watch some of them, and it gives me a sick feeling in my stomach, because I know some of them at night at home, they must have such an unbelievably sickening sense of self-worth. Some of these are very capable, intelligent people. And they're just so scared. The level of fright is just so, it's hard to explain, you know, unless you're here in America and you watch this every day and you're paying a lot of attention. It's just, it's very disturbing. And, you know, what Liz Cheney worries about, and what, you know, moderate Republicans like me who have changed our mind about this are starting to worry about, is that we are actually facing a danger that we really have never faced before, you know. And we get used to our institutions and we get comfortable with it, and we say, well, that could never happen here. We're now, you know, facing a situation where there is a significant likelihood that Donald Trump is going to win this Republican nomination, and there is a significant chance that he is going to win the presidential election and will be back in the White House again. And if that happens, our democracy, I believe, is literally at risk. This is a very clear and present danger, because he has basically already showed us what he will do with not trying to leave office before. And he has already used language, in the past, like that maybe we should do away with term limits and that, he'll serve 10 or 14 years. And now he says things, as he humiliates these other Republican government officials that will, stand next to him and smile. He says things like Republicans always bend the knee. This is not how a government leader speaks. This is how kings speak. This is how dictators speak. And all of these things, when he talks about serving more than our, by law, you can only serve 2 terms, a total of 8 years. So when he talks about serving longer terms than that, and when he talks about people bending the knee, we can cast all of these things off as jokes. But I think we need to actually listen to these things and put this in the context of what we have seen him do. And as I said, if you're one of those people yet that you haven't had the exposure to actually see what he has very, very clearly done already and the things that he's tried to do, just pick up a book like this. Pick up Liz Cheney's book that details it all very clearly, or watch some of it on YouTube. And see for yourself. See some testimony for some of these Republican witnesses that will tell you about how they observed and behave. This is, I think we all need to ask ourselves right now. You never had to ask this question before, and even us Republicans need to ask ourselves, if Donald Trump is elected and in the office again in this next term, do we honestly believe that at the end of that 4-year term that he will leave, that he will just voluntarily leave? Or do we think that he will find a way to make changes, that he will pressure other government officials, and that he will try to find a way to do away with this and stay? Can you say for sure that that is going to happen? No, but I think that any of us that ask ourselves that, honestly, based on an understanding of everything that's transpired so far, I think any of us that ask ourselves that honestly would not be sure of the answer to that question. And if you're not sure of the answer to that question, we are potentially walking into a dictatorship. We've never really had this happen before. And I think we're at a point, as Liz Cheney says, where we kind of need to just kind of wake up and see this for what it is, see this individual for who he is. As I started to say before, democracies are not, you think it can't happen here. We have had democracies fall all the time. There will always be, individuals that will rise up and try to undermine the structure of democracy for their own ends and goals. We have seen it happen repeatedly throughout history. The United States has had an incredibly good run, 250 years. We are the longest democracy. We are not immune from this. Eventually, this person does pop up like they have everywhere else in the world for all of history. Eventually, that is going to happen now, and it's sure starting to appear like now is the time when it's starting to happen. And even a small chance of walking into a dictatorship is too much of a chance. And it's pretty scary based upon some of the Republican leadership that is, like I said, is basically prostrating themselves before him and willing to support him out of fear. And there used to, there's a saying, you don't hear it so much, but we used to have a saying here in America called politics stops at the water's edge. And what that meant was we have a lot of policy discussion. We have policy debates in time. That's internally. That's healthy for democracy, right? You have debates and compromise. But so we always have these political arguments. But when we face what that phrase meant, that when we faced a threat from a foreign power, that all that ends, and we unify together. We stop the internal fighting. We unify together to face that foreign threat. Politics stops at the water's edge. Seems like there should also be a saying that sometimes, like now, those threats can come from the inside. They can be an internal threat. And it seems like we need a saying that, like, politics stops at freedom's end, or politics stops at democracy's end. When the very state of our democracy is in danger, the politics has to stop. And that is what Liz Cheney is talking about, you know. And whenever discussions about Trump come up, it's always just inextricably infused with the politics behind it. But what Cheney is saying is, it doesn't matter what your politics are. You can vote Democrat, you can vote Republican, you can vote something else. You just can't vote for the one individual that is probably, or not, I mean, not probably, but that is maybe going to walk us into a dictatorship, and is saying and doing things that are really giving a very good indication of that. That, you know, really, really seems to be, this really, really does. It's not hyperbole. Liz Cheney is one of the most conservative and level-headed people that we could possibly ask for as a leader in this country. And she does not say this lightly. And it's not something that I say lightly, where, you know, that it really looks like a clear and present danger, that our democracy really is potentially at stake and could potentially unravel if Donald Trump gets into the White House again. If he gets in again, this time, all of those brave people that were around him won't be around him this time. He will know how to do it, and he will make sure that all of the right, loyal people are around this time to make it actually work. So I think that's everything I wanted to say. You may see cut. You know, if we have to, like I said, we remember something else later that we forgot to say, or I rambled on about something too much. You know, maybe we'll fix it. But I'm going to try not to do that and leave it as it is. So, like I said, comments and discussion are welcome. You know, respectful debate is always welcome, no matter what the issue is, Trump or otherwise. But you know, let's keep it respectful and just you know, go somewhere else if you're inclined to do something different. So, okay. So thanks so much for watching. We hope we didn't upset anybody too much today, but if you don't want to leave anything substantive, you can always leave a puppy emoji. She always likes to see those. Or maybe you leave us a flag emoji just to say that America matters. And sometimes, you know, there are things more important than policy debates and political issues. Sometimes we got to stop and protect our democracy, and then we can get back to the politics once we make sure that that's secure. So, thanks so much for watching. We'll see you again very soon with a much less controversial video. Take care of yourselves and each other, and we'll see you next time.